Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jackman Mind Sculptor, and I'm here from youtube.com/nalgay. I'm here today because gatheringmagic.com and coolstuffinc.com asked me to do a video and review all of the recent spoilers for Dragon's Maze. So let's go ahead and get right to it. Let's go ahead and jump right into the card that's pretty much on everyone's minds, which is Ralzera. He is a new Planeswalker, and the first Is It Planeswalker. And you know, like any Planeswalker, he's cool. So this one is 4 mana, he starts at 4 loyalty, and let's go ahead and look at his +1 ability. So his +1 ability is basically Twiddle on steroids, because you can tap a permanent and untap another target permanent. So this is great if you're playing a tempo type deck, you can tap a blocker down. And keep in mind, unlike Tamil, it doesn't keep them tapped, so it can't really be used defensively. But it's a very aggressive +1 because you tap down a blocker and you can untap mana essentially, so you can keep accelerating. And that's a new effect that Izzet has not really had before. So this +1 is interesting. It's not he can't really defend himself with it, but it's still a very powerful effect. Especially if you ever play Cube or anything and you're playing with artifacts like Mana Vault or Mana Crypt, his +1 is actually really good. And then his -2 is basically Lightning Bolt, or these days it would actually be Searing Spear, which costs 1 more. But yeah, his -2 is actually the ability that protects him. Similar in a lot of ways to Liliana of the Veil. I mean, they're totally different Planeswalkers who do different things, but yeah, his minus ability does protect him. And unlike, say, Liliana or Ajani Vengeant of the olden days, he can actually use his -2 ability twice because he starts at 4 loyalty. And that's a pretty interesting thing. That actually might make him playable as opposed to unplayable. And then, of course, his ultimate is you get to flip a lot of coins. It's a Stitch in Time. This is an old card from Ravnica, where you flip the coin, and if you won the flip, you got to take an extra turn. Here, if you -7 him, you get to do it 5 times. So probably not going to be happening in Standard, but I can actually see this happening in Limited, and obviously EDH/Commander. Should be a really fun ability, and I think he's actually going to be a really good Planeswalker. I'm not sure if he'll actually break into Standard, because Standard is just too fast for him right now, basically, with Naya Blitz. And he actually doesn't do that much against the control type decks. But we'll see. We'll see what Dragon's Maze brings for us and how Ralzera will fall into the set. And then the next card I want to talk about is Putrefy. Now this is a reprint from the original Ravnica, City of Guilds, and it's a great card. Because in Standard, one of the major archetypes is Jund Midrange, and that deck has actually been using Murder as a one-of. And the Putrefy in that deck is basically a way better Murder, because one, it can target artifacts in addition to creatures, and the creature cannot be regenerated. I mean, it's not too relevant, but still semi-relevant. And because Jund is already running black and green together, and Murder already has 2-color mana symbols, this is almost basically a strict upgrade. So yeah, Putrefy is back in Standard. It's just a great removal spell. It's very flexible, and yeah, it's definitely going to see some play. And the next card I want to talk about is Obzedat's Aid. Now this is actually the first time you can resurrect any permanent in your own graveyard. It is a 5-mana spell, and you can only use it once, so I'm not sure if it'll fit into Standard anywhere, but the ability to resurrect your own Planeswalkers is actually kind of cool. Any Esper deck, Esper Super Friends or something like that, might try to play it for value, but I think if you're going to try to play it for value, you might as well just like run more Planeswalkers. And unlike Unburial Rites, which is great because in those decks where they mill everything, if you mill Unburial Rites, you can cast it from the graveyard. You can't really do that with Obzedat's Aid. So a fairly powerful effect, but I'm not sure if it will find a place in Standard yet. And so the next card I want to talk about is the Selesnya Mythic that was spoiled, and the card is called Voice of Resurgence. At first glance, it just looks like a 2/2 creature with a bunch of text, but if you actually read that text, this card is really, really good. People have been saying $20 good. I'm not sure if it's $20 good, but it's still good. So what it does is, whenever an opponent casts a spell on your turn, or if this creature dies, you get a token creature where its power and toughness is equal to the creatures you control. So basically, if you guys have been playing recently, Crusader of Audric, which was a 3-mana creature. So there's a 2/2 that when it dies, it creates what is essentially a 3-mana token creature. A very powerful effect, and people have been deeming this as a hate bear because it's really good against control decks, because control decks are the ones that want to hold up mana to like counterspell on your turn, or think twice, or Sphinx's Revelation at the end of your turn. And so it is a very powerful card because you have to kill it twice to get rid of it. There are only a few straight up answers to it, such as a Pillar of Flame or a Terminus, for example, because when it dies that way, it doesn't actually die, which is the act of moving from the battlefield to the graveyard. And so it's really a hard creature to get rid of. It's tons of value, and I think it will see some play in Standard. The key is finding a deck where it actually fits. Because currently Naya Blitz is just wants like a bunch of fast and aggressive creatures. And Voice of Resurgence is not really fast or aggressive, but it is very resilient. So it's just too powerful of an effect to like not see play somewhere. So we'll definitely see it tried out in a lot of decks. And then for the Azorius Mythic, we have Council of the Absolute. Now people have been joking about this card. It's a 4 mana 2/4 creature that lets you name a card, and people have been saying like, why bother naming a card? Why not just say Sphinx's Revelation? Which is kind of funny, because I mean that's probably going to be the #1 use for it in mirror matches. Because what this card actually does is, when you name that card, your opponent cannot play that card, and whenever you play that card, you get to cast it for 2 less. So like if you like played it on turn 4 and named Sphinx's Revelation, you know, on turn 5, not only can your opponent not cast it, you'll be able to cast it for 2 more than you normally would with the amount of mana you have. So it's actually a very interesting effect. And obviously the extreme value is in the mirror match, because that's when your opponent's playing the same spells as you. But you know, it's still a 2/4 body, it survives certain things. Obviously it doesn't pass the Thragtusk test or anything like that, it loses completely. But in those cases, you're probably playing Bant anyway. And I'm actually not sure if it will see play, because 4 mana is a lot to ask for that effect. I mean, 2 more cards for 4 mana is nice, and you know, keeping your opponent off of the Sphinx's Revelation is nice. But they're also playing control. You know, they're gonna be having Supreme Verdicts, or they can have Bounce or a counterspell for it. So powerful effect, but I'm actually not sure this one will see any play. And in limited, it's actually not even that great. Well, actually, in limited, it's okay because you know exactly what's in your hand. So if you have a high cost spell in your hand, you can play this guy and just name the card in your hand just to act as semi-mana acceleration. So I mean, powerful effects, but I'm not seeing a lot of use for it yet, but we'll see. So now let's go ahead and segue into the Maze Runners. So in Dragon's Maze, the story is there's a maze that every guild must compete in to like win a great prize at the end. And every guild sends a Maze Runner to run the maze for them. They're basically the champion of the guilds. And so let's go ahead and talk about the first one, which is the Izzet Maze Runner. His name is Melik Izzet Paragon. He's kind of cool because Izzet actually created this weird to run the maze for them. He's actually not a person. And in terms of the card itself, it's a 6 mana creature. It's 2/4. And its effect is very similar to Oracle of Muldaya. So Oracle of Muldaya let you look at the top card of your library, and if it's a land, you play it, and you get to play an extra land. Melik Izzet Paragon is similar, except he only works with instants and sorceries. And if it is an instant or sorcery, you actually get to copy it. So there's a potential for a lot of power here. But because he's a 6 mana 2/4 creature, I actually just don't see him seeing play anywhere. He's going to be terrible in limited, because limited is mostly creatures and lands in your 40 card deck. In standard, he's just way too slow, doesn't do enough. The only saving grace is maybe he'll be a commander in EDH, because you can build an entire deck around him with essentially nothing but lands and spells if you wished. So yeah, I mean, this champion is interesting, great for Johnnies, not so great for Spikes. And so let's go ahead and jump to another blue Maze Runner, and this one is part of the Dimir Guild. His name is Miracle Vosk, Mind Drinker. So this guy he's basically a Mind Funeral with wings, because he's a 2/4 flying, and when he hits your opponent, you get to mill your opponent until they hit 4 lands. So, I mean, in Constructed and other formats like that, no one's probably going to play him because he's very expensive for this effect. But in Limited, this guy is a powerhouse. Because essentially, if you hit 3 times with him, you win. And you know, most Limited decks only play 17 lands, and by the time like he gets to hit 2 to 3 times, you know, most people have already drawn at least 6 lands, you're leaving only about 11 in your deck. So, and in addition, because in Limited formats, you're going to be combining with Gatecrash and Return of Ravnica, you're already going to have access to a lot of mill also. You know, you can play your Balustrade Spies, you can play Paranoid Delusions if you're going real deep. So yeah, he's a very powerful card in Limited, but outside of that, I don't think he'll see much play. So moving over to Golgari, we have Vrol's the Scar Striped. So he is a 3 mana 2/2, and he has actually 2 very powerful abilities. So the first ability, the simpler one, is you can sacrifice another creature to regenerate Vrol's, and every creature in your graveyard gains scavenge equals to its mana cost. So this, I mean, basically, you know, he's always going to be alive because he can keep regenerating himself, unless he gets putrefied, of course. But any creature that you dies basically becomes more fodder for him, and he can grow insanely huge. So I mean, Johnnies will love this card, and you know, maybe we'll finally have a use for Vexing Devil in Standard, because when you play Vexing Devil, even if they take the 4 damage, you're going to be able to put that those counters on rolls. So he might see play in some sort of Jund aggro decks, which have already been seeing a little bit of play, though not the most popular archetype. And in general, like even in Commander, this guy should be super fun because Commander damage, you know, if you hit someone for 21 Commander damage, you win the game, or you don't win the game, but they are out of the game. So this guy is a huge Voltron general because not only does he regenerate himself, he can get a huge amount of counters easily if you have any sort of dredge or mill mechanic. I'm pretty sure some Johnny out there is going to want to combine him with Death Shadow, because Death Shadow is a 1 mana 13/13 creature that gets -X, where X is your life total. But you know, even if you play him and he dies immediately, you can scavenge 13 counters right onto Varolz. So super powerful combo. Johnnies are definitely going to love Varolz. And yeah, he's actually one of the cooler Maze Runners in my opinion. And the next Maze Runner I want to talk about is the Orzhov one, and her name is Teysa, Envoy of Ghosts. And so she's actually a character from the original Ravnica block. She actually already has her own card. And the new one is pretty much completely different. So she's a 7 mana 4/4, and basically her ability is like, she can't be killed by creatures, and if a creature attacks you, she kills that creature and gives you a 1/1 flying spirit. So she basically sits back and makes you invincible. So the thing about her though is because she's 7 mana, she's really hard to get into play, and you kind of want your 7 mana creatures to turn the game around or win you the game, and not really just like sit there and play defense, because that's basically what she does. And she dies to murder essentially. So I actually don't find her that exciting. She's a little bit too expensive. Her effect is splashy. She's going to be a huge bomb in limited, of course, because you know, limited, if you don't have removal, bombs will overtake the game, and this is definitely one of those. But yeah, pretty cool flavor card, not so much in power. And for the Azorius Maze Runner, we have Lavinia of the 10th. So she is a 5 mana Azorius card. She's 4/4, and when she comes into play, she detains every non-land permanent that's converted mana cost 4 or less, as well as having protection from red. So she's the only Maze Runner spoiled so far that's pretty much like anti a single color, and her effect is actually pretty powerful. So I mean, the thing about her is her main ability to be successful will hinge on that detain effect and how you can abuse it. So you can use a Restoration Angel. If you're gonna want to go real deep, you can use a Conjurer's Closet to detain everything every turn. But like at a certain point, when your opponent plays a Thragtusk, that doesn't really work anymore. So pretty splashy effect, and she is probably going to wreck mono red decks. She might be a sideboard card in the end. But yeah, I mean, fairly powerful card like all of the Maze Runners, but this one I think requires a bit more setup, and it's only good against very specific things. So I mean, it's an okay card, but I'm not too excited about it. Alright, and for the Rakdos Maze Runner, we have Exiva Rakdos Blood Witch. So she's a 4 mana 3/3, except she does have Unleash, First Strike, and Haste. And her cool ability is that she gives all of your other creatures with +1/+1 counters haste. So I mean, in the current format, I'm not sure she'll see a lot of play, because Falcon Wrath Aristocrat exists, Hellrider exists, and for mid-range decks, Olivia Voldaren exists. There's a lot of Rakdos 4-drops, essentially. But once those rotate out, and I can actually see her being really good, and she's also going to be really good in block. Because in block, a lot of people play the red deck where you run a Rakdos Calculars and Gorehouse Chainwalkers. And when you have Exiva out, 4/4 Unleash First Strike, not only is her body good, that's a double entendre there, but all the top decks of Rakdos Calculars and Gorehouse Chainwalkers that you draw will all have haste and become that much better. So I think she will see play, and she'll see a lot of play in Standard after the stuff rotates out, unless of course Theros just hands us a bunch of really good Rakdos cards. And for the Simic Maze Runner, we have Vorel of the Hulklade. So he is a 3 mana 1/4, and you can play 1 green and 1 blue to double the number of counters on target artifact, land, or creature. And so, I mean, if you have Vorel out and you have Parallel Lives out, you almost have Doubling Season, not quite. Because you got to remember his ability can't target Planeswalkers, which is actually probably the most fun you could have with him. So I mean, Vorel is actually one of my least favorite Maze Runners, despite Simic being one of my favorite guilds just in terms of theme and imagery. I mean, fish crabs, come on. But like Vorel himself, he's still playable in Limited, I guess, because he is a 3 mana 1/4, and potentially with all your evolved creatures, they can get really big. But outside of Limited, I just can't see him being played at all, not even in like EDH Commander, just because his effect is not splashy enough. So yeah, I mean, still cool thematically, and not so cool in practice. And for the Gruul Maze Runner, we have Rurik Thar the Unbowed. So he is a 6 mana 6/6, flashing back to the Titans here. He has Vigilance and Reach, and his drawback is he has to attack every turn. And that's not even that big of a drawback, is because he has Vigilance, and he's a very powerful creature. And his other ability this is what puts him over the top, in my opinion. Whenever a player plays a non-creature spell, he deals 6 damage to that player. So he really punishes control decks. I think I could see him in Standard a lot as a mid-range finisher in some decks. The aggro decks, probably not, because he's too high cost at 6 mana. But any mid-range deck, I think, would want to have this in the sideboard at least, just because the effect is so powerful and the body is huge. he passes the Thragtusk test because Thragtusk is only 5 power. So yeah, very powerful card, and I look forward to like testing it out in my cube at least. So one of the splashier cards that has been spoiled, both figuratively and maybe in the art, is the Advent of the Worm. It's a 4-mana Selesnya spell that lets you put a 5/5 trampling worm into play. So don't worry, Limited, you're not going to get wrecked too much by this guy because it is a rare at least, thank God. But in Constructed, I'm actually not sure we'll see any play at all. Just because, for 1 more mana and for a lot less colored mana, you can have a Thragtusk, which, is better against removal and against board wipe, it's better against aggro. I mean, Advent of the Worm is a powerful card, but 4 mana for 5 power is nothing new to green these days. And I just don't think he'll see that much play, even though the card is very cool thematically. And I mean, fairly powerful. 4 mana 5/5s are always good to have. And for another card that was spoiled, this is actually the Buy a Box promo. It's called Render Silent. So for 2 blue and 1 white, you can counter target spell, and then that player does not get to cast any spells for the rest of the turn. So a very splashy effect, and almost strictly better than Dissipate in some matchups, but worse than others. Because with Dissipate, you can Dissipate, for example, on Barrel Rights, and then they don't get to use a flashback. But Render Silent is good against, better against aggro decks, just because after you counter the first creature, they can't just like play out like 2 more creatures after you counter them. So, but a 3 mana, a counter spell needs to be like really good. And this is really good, but I'm actually not sure we'll see that much play just because the format doesn't really support 3 mana counter spells at this point. A lot of times you just rather, you would wish for something like Mana Leak, which is no longer in Standard, but much more efficient because it's 2 mana. 1 mana is huge in Magic at pretty much all times, so that's the main thing that's keeping me from really loving Render Silent at the moment. And so Wizards has also spoiled one of the new mechanics in the set, and this is the mechanics is actually a little bit new and a little bit of returning, because they're bringing back split cards, which are cards with like 2 cards on them. But the twist is that there's a new ability called Fuse. So in the olden days, like with Fire and Ice, with a split card, you had to choose one side to cast. With the new mechanic of Fuse, you can still choose one side to cast, or you can fuse them and cast both of them at the same time, and they become 1 spell. So one of the examples of this is Beck and Call. So Beck is, you can, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you get to draw a card, and then Call will put 4 1/1 bird tokens into play. So when you fuse this, you pay all the mana at once, but you resolve from left to right. So the Beck effect happens first, and then you put the 4 tokens into play, and you draw 4 cards. So a very interesting twist on an old and returning mechanic, and I think it's actually going to be awesome. And I think the best card that has been spoiled so far with Fuse is far and away. It's far and away the best Fuse card. So the first part is for 2 mana blue, you can bounce a creature, and then the second part is for 3 mana, 1 of which is black, you can make a target player sacrifice a creature. So very powerful effect. The key is both effects are very powerful on their own, but if your opponent has a bunch of threats out, you can bounce the lower threat and make them recast it and lose tempo, and then make them sacrifice the bigger threat. So a very powerful card, and I think it's going to see play. I'm not sure if it'll last, but I'm fairly sure a lot of people will test it. Maybe in some kind of like Duskmantle Seer, Bug Temple deck. People always want to bring back Delver, but we'll see if Ponder comes back. One of the more exciting rare cards that has been spoiled so far is a Blood Scrivener. So this is a bear. He is a 2 mana, 2 power creature, but his ability is actually pretty cool. So if you have no cards in your hand, he lets you draw 2 cards instead of 1, and you lose 1 life for drawing that extra card. So anytime a creature lets you draw cards multiple times, that's a very powerful effect. People have been talking about him as analogous to Dark Confidant. He's like Baby Bob, essentially. And I don't think he'll be that good, but he's still a bear with no downside, with a huge upside. Not only that, he's a zombie. So, I mean, zombies have really been lacking good 2-drops. There's Blood Artist, and now this guy who's actually a zombie. So I wouldn't be surprised if people would try Rakdos Zombies again, bring back Gravecrawler and Garrul's Messenger, and add in Blood Scrivener so they get a lot more late game action. Very powerful card, and I can't wait to actually try him out in my cube. But yeah, very excited for Blood Scrivener. And one of the more exciting mythics spoiled is Master of Cruelties. So this is a 5 mana Rakdos card. He's a 1/4, so he survives Searing Spear and things like that. And he's both First Strike and Death Touch, a very powerful combination. So he pretty much wins any combat 1-on-1 because of First Strike and Death Touch. And the splashy ability is like if you attack with him, you can only attack with him alone. And if he's unblocked, he will reduce your opponent's life to 1. So a huge effect. Johnnies will love this card. I think Spikes still love this card enough to want to abuse him somehow. And if you play Commander and your commander is Kalia of the Bass, Master of Cruelties, he's a demon, so he actually does work with Kalia. And his ability that reduces your opponent's life to 1 actually works because that triggers during, right after declare blockers. So even if he's put into play attacking, his ability will still trigger. So very cool combo right there, and I still actually want to see him played in Standard. I'm not sure where he actually fits. I mean, are there better finishers? Probably, but he's just a really cool and splashy effect. And a big splashy card that has been spoiled is Zerta Ancient. So this is a 5 mana dual card. He's a 7/5, so more power than you paid for in mana. And his ability is, it's a symmetric ability, so of course there are caveats to that. So like whenever a player taps a land for mana, they add an additional mana of any type that that land can produce to their mana pool. So, I mean, very powerful effect obviously, but if you're tapping out for Zerta Ancient on turn 5, that means your opponent is going to get to use their mana first. And you know, if your opponent is playing like white and blue, for example, they're just going to tap for 10 mana and then Sphinx's Revelation out of nowhere. I mean, he's a very powerful card, but anytime there's a symmetric effect, you have to be able to set up to abuse that better than your opponents. And in the current metagame, there are just so many X spells that will let another deck just get more advantage out of the Zerta Ancient than you. So I'm actually not sure he'll see a lot of play. Maybe as a sideboard card against aggro decks, because aggro decks are the one deck that doesn't actually run X spells or any high cost spells. Yeah, but I'm not too keen on this guy. Symmetric effects are always really hard to abuse, especially when they're on a creature body, because your opponent can abuse it and then kill the creature fairly easily. So not too excited about Zerta Ancient, but you know, he's a card. And then, of course, Merrill, Mark Rosewater, one of the lead designers in Magic, he spoiled a card called Goblin Test Pilot. So first of all, this guy really is terrible. You're not going to see him played anywhere, not even in Limited, because he's a 3 mana Izzet card, right? He is 0/2 and flying, and you can tap him to deal 2 damage to a random target. So random target includes himself, it includes you. So if you play him on an empty board, he only has a 33% chance of hitting your opponent, or he could kill himself or deal 2 damage to you. So you can see he's pretty much unplayable, but I think I still am just going to play him in 1 game because at pre-releases there's going to be 2-headed giant. So if there's ever a 2-headed giant game, I'm just going to like smash him onto the table when everyone has like 10 creatures out, tap him, and then like make people resolve it, because that's part of the fun. I mean, it's a card that's not really about winning and such. It's really a card about flavor and fun. And yeah, so Goblin Test Pilot. And so those were my thoughts on the couple of spoilers that have come out so far for Dragon's Maze. I hope you guys enjoyed it and found it informative. If you agree and or disagree with me, feel free to subscribe to my channel and praise and or argue with me as you see fit. My channel is actually youtube.com/nalgae, that's Nalgae. And I do a lot of videos like this where I discuss strategy and spoilers and stuff like that. I also do Magic Online videos and videos in real life, and I do commentary over those. But yeah, I'm actually the first of a group of YouTubers that will be doing videos for GatheringMagic.com and CoolStuffIncorporated.com, CoolStuffInc.com. So look forward to the future videos that will be appearing here. And yeah, this is Jack the Mind Sculptor, and thanks for watching.